Hello and welcome back to part 3 of the Buckthorn backpack and tote sew along. I'm glad you made it this far and I'm excited to finish up my backpack and tote, and I hope you feel the same. But so far we just have the outer shell completed of either your backpack or your tote, and today we're going to be assembling the lining and then inserting the zipper. So the steps for that are the same for either the backpack or the tote. So I'm just going to be showing myself sewing the tote, finishing that off, and just know that that applies for the backpack as well. I will be going over the 2 different styles of zippers, how to prepare those. So this is like a regular fixed length zipper. It has the stop at the end, and then the zipper by the yard, which just finishes a little bit differently. So that's what we're going to be finishing up, and I hope you'll have fun and join along. Okay, so first of all, we're going to start by assembling the lining, and that is very similar to the exterior that we did in the last video. And we'll just go through that step by step. So the first step is to place the pocket pieces right sides together. One of the pieces is going to have interfacing, the other one does not. And we're just going to sew along this long top edge. Okay, so once that is sewn, I like to press the seam open first on a pocket. And then I'm going to position these pieces wrong sides together and then press along that seam. And then we'll take it over, and I like to do 2 rows of top stitching, a 1/4 inch apart, so just along this top folded edge. Okay, so here's my completed pocket with the 2 rows of top stitching, and then we're just going to grab one of the main panel lining pieces. I'm going to place my pocket directly on top and align it to the sides and bottom edge, and then I'm just going to pin it in place. Okay, so after I've pinned here, you can also divide this pocket. I do recommend dividing at least 1 time down the middle, otherwise it can be kind of floppy inside, but you can choose however many times you'd like to divide it for whatever you're putting in your pockets, but just recommend doing at least once. So then we'll baste along these side and bottom edges, and then we'll top stitch along the marked line. Okay, the pocket is basted along the sides and bottom, and then I did the divider, and so I've got the 2 pockets. Okay, so then we'll move along and sew the lining just like we did the exterior, starting by placing the main panel pieces right sides together and sew along these side seams. Okay, so I've sewn the side seams, and I know this is kind of funny looking, but I didn't have enough interfacing, or I cut it wrong. And I think that's okay, like especially for the lining pieces. If you're close enough to the seam allowance, I'm just gonna make it work. So those side seams are sewn, and then I'm gonna go ahead and grab my base, get that marked into quarters, mark the quarter markings for the main panel, and then we'll attach the base to the main panel. And just make sure that when you have your main panel here that you're grabbing the bottom edge. So just take a peek inside and make sure that you know where the pocket opening is, and use the opposite side for the base. Otherwise you'll have an upside down pocket. Okay, so now that's marked, I'm just going to pin everything in place, and then we'll take it over and sew the base on. I did forget to mention that for the lining pieces, if you did want to taper in these side seams, just you could start at the 1/2 inch seam allowance and then just taper in a bit to like 5/8 of an inch. That's going to help that lining fit better. It just kind of depends on what fabrics you're using and interfacings, and yeah, so that's just an option. But then I'm going to go ahead and trim my seam allowance. Okay, so the lining is assembled and we're just going to work on putting it into the exterior. So the main thing to note here is to make sure your pocket is along the back edge of the tote. So if I have my front pocket here of the exterior, I'm going to make sure that this pocket is along the back edge. And we're just going to line the side seams and pin it all around that open edge. All right, so those pieces are pinned together and I'm just going to baste all along this top open edge. Okay, so I've basted along that edge, and just make sure that you keep these handles bent back out of the way so that you don't catch them when you're basting those together. And now we can just kind of set that aside, and we're going to start work on preparing our zippers. So as I said in the beginning, I'm going to show how to use fixed length as well as zipper by the yard, and how I prepare those. Just kind of, there's just a slight difference, but either one works great. Okay, so I'm just going to start by making these zipper end tabs, and what you'll first want to do is fold these short ends to the wrong side by 1/2 inch, and then we're going to fold those long edges to the center, and then the whole thing in half again. And I'll show that a little bit closer up when I'm pressing. Okay, so I just like to use a little bit of spray starch and get that fabric pressed so it folds nicely. And then we're gonna just press those short ends, wrong sides together. And then the long sides are going to meet at the center. Those are also about 1/2 inch. And then we'll press the whole thing in half again. So that's kind of what my end tab will look like. Okay, so for the fixed length zipper, I like to just kind of tuck these. Actually, this is true for both zipper types, but I think it gives a nice little finish. But I kind of tuck these ends in an overlap toward the back, just so it kind of gives it a nicer finished look. And then I'm just going to baste along this little edge here, and then I would slip the end tab to match up to that metal end stop. So I can probably fold it over a little bit more here and then slide that on. And then I'm going to pin this and then just stitch around all 4 sides. So that's kind of how that'll look. For the zipper tape, it's similar. I'm just going to make sure I've got the right end. So just you're going to have one end that's open, and this will be your end. And I do the same thing. I just kind of fold this tape, kind of overlap back on itself, and stitch it in place. And then I put my tab over the end and then stitch around that. You can use glue or pins here if you feel more comfortable with that. Okay, so now that the tab is sewn on the end, I'm going to finish these raw ends of the zipper tape. And so that's just a little bit different than if you're using the fixed length zipper. The fixed length zipper has these end stops here. So that kind of gives you a guide of where to fold it back on itself. But I just like to make sure that this is squared up so that's nice and flush. And then I use just this little folding technique, I guess. I kind of make a fold about a 1/2 inch using kind of the back of my finger, and I make that fold match the zipper teeth. So it's kind of a 45-degree fold, and then I pin it in place. So I just kind of have my finger behind here, about a 1/2 inch back from this raw end, and then I'm going to match that to the teeth. And it does not have to be perfect. I think as long as they're symmetrical on both sides. If you have one that's slightly longer, you'll want to make sure you adjust it to make sure it's the same length. And then I'm just going to tack it in place with my sewing machine. So there's what that looks like. Then the zipper pull won't come off of there. So that's the zipper by the yard. And then here I'll show you the same or similar method for the fixed length zipper. So I'm going to use those end stops as a guide. And I like to do a similar method here where I'm just going to fold it back. So I'm just pushing to make a fold from the back, and then I'm going to align it to that, what I guess is like the finished edge of the zipper tape. So that's one way. And then I'll just tack it in place along here, this edge. So that's the fold, and then I'm just going to tack it in place. The other way I like to do it is just a little bit simpler, is just to fold it back on itself like that. So this is the back side of the zipper, and I just kind of bend it back at like a 45-degree angle, and then I would do the same as just tack it in place along this edge here. So however you'd like. All right, moving along, we're going to get the zipper inserted. So this is my zipper for the tote, and I've got the tote facing me, and I'm just going to kind of open this up so I can see the lining. And there's some measurements here that you're going to want to pay attention to. So don't skip looking at the instructions during this part. But basically, you're going to kind of find this side seam, and you're going to mark 1.5 inches away from that side seam. I can just put a pin in it for now so it's a little easier to see. But you can also just mark it. And then I'm going to do the same for the other side seam. So 1.5 inches away from this side seam. Okay, so those are marked. And then I'm going to take my zipper. So this is the wrong side of the zipper, the bottom side, and the right side facing up. So I'm going to have it right side facing up so I can see that zipper pull, and I'm going to place it right on top of this lining. But the thing here is that it's going to be about 1/4 inch down from this raw edge. Now that's important for the next step when we're adding the binding. So make sure you do that, because otherwise it kind of gets in the way. But I'm just going to pin along here, making sure that zipper edge tape is 1/4 inch down from that top raw edge. And I'm just going to stop when I get to that marking of the 1.5 inch that I did earlier, and I'll put a pin in there, so that's where I know where to stop. So now I'm going to baste this zipper in place all along its edge, stopping at this last pin, making sure the handle is bent down and out of the way. And let's see, I can just take that out. Yeah, so just baste along that edge. Okay, so there is the zipper basted in place, and you'll know that the zipper kind of comes off of this edge, and that's intended. We're going to make sure the side seams are aligned, and then I'm going to bring that remaining zipper tape edge and match it to the other side, this remaining side of the lining. And we're going to pin it in place the same as we did before, 1.5 inches from each side seam, and then making sure we're 1/4 inch down from this raw edge. I'll just make sure that those are marked, and then I'll get to pinning. Okay, so here's the lining. I'm just gonna take that raw edge of the zipper and starting at that marking, which it should automatically kind of go in that direction since you've already got the other half basted. So I'm just going to take that out and then just keep pinning along this edge. Okay, so now I have that pinned, and then I can go ahead and open up this zipper. Just gonna make the move, might need to move the pins just slightly if you're using pins. Just so you can get past the zipper, pull past them, but it's important to keep that zipper closed just so you get proper alignment. Okay, so I can open that zipper all the way up, and then we're going to do the same thing, basting from pin to the end of the zipper right along that edge. Okay, so now my zipper is basted in place, and you can definitely check that you have it in right at this point. So even though you don't have the top binding installed yet, you're gonna have the zipper so it looks right and it's facing right side up, so you can grab the pull and open it. It should open all the way, and then just double check that everything looks right. And then we can start preparing the binding and attach it to that top edge to give that finished look. So we're going to grab the zipper binding piece, and the short ends get placed right sides together, and then we're just going to sew that with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, so I did that a little bit opposite of what the instructions say. I'm just going to grab my zipper binding from the backpack, and what you're going to want to do is fold these long edges to the wrong side by a 1/2 inch. So just make sure you've got that, so each of those long edges gets pressed in by a 1/2 inch. And we're going to do that along the length of the zipper tape. And I really encourage you to use spray starch. If you have a fabric that you think might be stretchy at all, you can definitely add a layer of fusible woven interfacing on this, and that will help make sure that stays without stretching. Once those long edges have been pressed, you'll want to unfold them. So that made a nice crease mark. So that's going to be important for when you're attaching the binding. So just open that up, and then you're going to align your short ends right sides together, and then just sew along that edge, that short end, and that'll make a loop. If you did do it opposite like I first did, and you sewed the short ends together first, I would just press that seam open, and then you're going to do the same thing, press those long edges down to the wrong side by a 1/2 inch. Okay, so now what we need to do, now that we have the binding pressed, we're going to mark that into quarters, as well as make sure that we have this top edge of the bag marked into quarters. Now you may have markings from before. You can just make sure that those are visible and pin those or mark them within the seam allowance. And then again, the side seams of this bag are the other quarter markings. So for the binding, I'm going to find that seam, and I'm going to just fold keep everything folded in half. And I'm actually just going to mark that on the wrong side here. And then we'll fold that in half again, so matching the marking to the seam. You can see that. And then we'll mark along these. All right, so I've got that all set. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here again, but this is just a little step in preparing this zipper to be in the best position for when we're attaching the binding. So we're on just one of the earlier steps right after we attach the zipper. We're going to make sure that this is a smooth curve down into the bag. And so I'm just going to take it and put a pin through it. And again, just making sure that the zipper is like smoothly curved. You wouldn't want it to be like folded like this. That's kind of what we're just trying to avoid by getting this pre-pinned. So that's what that'll look like. And just as long as we're going to be out of this seam allowance range here, so anything below that, it's fine, however it looks. But then we're going to get back here to the binding. I'm going to line this seam, so make sure that your binding is right side out. And we're going to be pinning it to the lining side. It's going to be right sides together with the lining. So I'm just going to grab that one seam and make sure that it's aligned to the side seam, and just start pinning around that whole top edge. Again, matching the quarter markings. Okay, so that binding is pinned into place, and then I would go ahead and put a few more pins in just to make sure everything is nice and secure. Now we're going to sew the binding in place. On this first pass, we're going to go right to the inside of this crease here that you made when you pressed it earlier. So again, making sure your handles are out of the way and just going nice and slow. Again, just to the, we'll be sewing just to the inside of this crease, so not closer to that way, but closer to the seam allowance, just by about a needle width or so. Yeah, just all the way around that top edge. I've got the binding, this first pass sewn in place. It's going to look like that. And it would be a good time to check just to make sure the zipper looks good. Make sure those ends got folded in properly, because you can always come back and just rip some of those stitches if you accidentally folded it over. But that looks good to me. That's how it should look. Yeah, so then we're almost done. We're just going to bring that binding up. We're going to fold it along that crease that we pressed earlier. And then this is a great place for clips. I actually prefer that over pins. Okay, so I've got my clips, and I'm just going to make sure that I bring this folded edge just past the line of stitching that I just did. So that's going to cover that, and just clip that in place. And you may want to take it back over and use your iron if you feel like you didn't, if it came kind of like unpressed a little bit. Also, if you did foam interfacing, or if you did a quilted version, you might want to trim this seam allowance down. And just depending on how well you kept that seam allowance here is going to determine how well this binding flips over the top. So if you're finding that you can't quite get it past that line of stitching, like as you can see here, if you're kind of struggling with that, you can trim that seam allowance. So here I'm going to do a little bit of trimming where I just didn't quite get that aligned very well. Okay, so that is what my binding looks like. Just going to make sure that this is tucked down for now. And since we already have sewn it to this inside edge, see how that's attached? We don't need to worry about that. So that's not coming out. But I like to machine sew my binding on. If you're not comfortable with that, you can also do hand stitching if you're comfortable with that too. It just kind of depends. It's probably a little easier with a cotton canvas than it would be with like a wax canvas, but it can always be hand sewn if you'd like that. But yeah, I'm just going to take it over the machine and I'm going to sew just on that fold. And I'm not really worrying about catching it at the back side. So because that's already sewn, I don't need to worry about if I'm actually catching it again. So it's going to stay in place no matter what, as long as I catch this just inside this folded edge. And I like to start in like an inconspicuous place. So I usually pick on the back side, just inside where this handle is, just to start my stitching. And you can also lengthen your stitch a little bit. Mine's like at a 3. And just make sure as you go along that you're kind of using your fingers to make sure everything is kind of slid down where it should be. Okay, so I've got the binding attached and this is kind of what it looks like. I'm just going to trim my little threads and I'm going to give my whole tote a nice press and I'm going to stuff it. I usually stuff my bags after I've made them to kind of help fill out the shape and kind of set that shape in place, especially when you have an oval base like this. It just really helps to do that final press and then fill it and then let it sit for a little while. I just find that really helps and just an easy thing to do to make your bags look really nice. But yeah, so that's my binding. And you can either have the zipper out or you can keep it tucked down in, whichever you prefer. You just have to tuck it down and then kind of get your zipper started. So either way works. But yeah, that's about it. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do is I've got my waxed cord and I'm just going to make a little zipper pull for my zipper. Even though this one has a nice pull on it, I think it's nice to have an extra little thing to grab. This is just about an 11-inch piece of waxed cord and I'm going to thread it down through the large hole and then both ends come up through the small hole. And then I'm going to thread both of those through this loop that I've created and just snug it down so that's nice and snug on the zipper. And then I can just do a knot and then trim those. So there's a nice easy zipper pull. I think those are really easy to grab and easy to use. Okay, so we are done with our tote and backpack and yeah, I think it turned out really nice. Here's my tote with the front pocket and this is how the zipper looks installed. Got the zipper pull on there and then the inside. Just got my stuffing in there. We've got the 2 pockets. And that's it. So yeah, I hope you had a fun time sewing along, and I hope you really love using your tote or backpack. I think they're a really handy, easy to use bag. So yeah, I'll see you next time.